There is something happening in your life right now that most people will never stop to question. A pattern, a loop, a cycle that returns no matter how hard you try to escape it. You change your job, and somehow the same frustration follows you into the new office. You end a relationship, and somehow the same emotional wound resurfaces with a different face. You move to a new city, breathe new air, tell yourself this time will be different. And then, slowly, the same dynamics creep back in. And you stand there, confused, maybe even a little defeated, asking the same question that millions of people are asking right now. Why does this keep happening to me? What if I told you the answer has nothing to do with bad luck? What if I told you that the universe is not broken and neither are you? But something inside you is still running on an old program. And what if the moment you change that program, the loop simply stops? Because here is what almost no one is talking about. The patterns in your life are not accidents. They are reflections. They are echoes of something stored deep inside your nervous system, your emotional body, your identity. And until that inner structure shifts, the outside world has no choice but to keep reflecting the same reality back to you. This is not punishment. This is physics. This is consciousness interacting with a quantum field of infinite possibilities, and you are the one determining which possibilities become your actual experience. Let that land for a second. Most people spend their entire lives trying to rearrange the furniture in a house they never stop to question. They work harder, they plan better, they read more books, they change their habits, and sometimes those things help for a while, but then the same emotional weather returns, the same storms, the same fog, because the foundation underneath all of that effort, the identity that perceives and interprets every experience, has not changed. And identity is not what you think it is. It is not the story you tell at dinner parties. It is not your job title or your social media presence. Identity is the invisible operating system that runs beneath all of that, making decisions before you are even aware of them, filtering reality before you have the chance to choose what to see. Your brain is extraordinary, but it is also ancient in its design. Its primary mission is not joy or growth or abundance, it is survival. And survival, from the brain's perspective, means predictability. The nervous system would rather experience familiar pain than unfamiliar freedom, because familiar things feel safe. The brain maps every experience you have ever had, stores those maps as emotional memories, and then uses them to predict what will happen next. If you once felt rejected, the brain files that away. If you once experienced scarcity, the brain builds a whole architecture around protecting you from that feeling again. If betrayal once shattered your sense of safety, the nervous system goes on permanent alert, scanning every new situation for the same danger. This is why so many people feel like they are living the same year over and over. Not because the world refuses to change, but because the observer experiencing the world is still running a map drawn years ago. Your reactions are automatic. Your interpretations are preset. Your nervous system is essentially living in the past, producing the same chemical signals, triggering the same emotional states. And those emotional states color every single thing you perceive. A conversation that could be an opportunity reads as a threat. A challenge that could be a gift feels like more evidence that life is against you. And so the same story plays out. Again and again and again. Now here is where it gets fascinating, and I mean genuinely extraordinary, in a way that might shift something in you right now. Research in the field of quantum physics has shown us something that challenges everything we thought we knew about reality. In the quantum world, particles do not have fixed positions or states until they are observed. Before observation, they exist as waves of probability, a field of infinite potential. The moment a conscious observer interacts with that field, a specific outcome collapses into reality. Scientists call this the observer effect, and while the debate continues about how far this principle extends beyond the subatomic level, thinkers like Amit Goswami have proposed something breathtaking, that consciousness itself participates in the collapse of possibilities into physical experience, that the observer is not a passive witness to reality. The observer is actively shaping it. Think about what that means for your life. If you walk into every situation carrying the same emotional identity, the same nervous system patterns, the same unconscious expectations, You are bringing the same observer into contact with an infinite field of possibilities. And that observer, because of its conditioning, keeps selecting the same probabilities. Not because those are the only options available, but because those are the ones that match the frequency of your internal state. Your emotional body acts like a tuning fork. It resonates with experiences that vibrate at a similar frequency. And as long as that tuning fork is set to the frequency of old wounds, old fears, old limitations, the universe responds accordingly. It is not cruelty. It is not indifference. It is coherence. Reality is coherent with your identity, and that means the moment your identity shifts, reality shifts with it. This is the core of what we are exploring here. Not quick fixes, not surface-level motivation, something much deeper, the understanding that you are not just a product of your circumstances. You are the producer of them, not through force, not through control, but through the invisible structure of who you are being at the level of your nervous system, your emotional patterns, your identity. And when that inner structure evolves, the outer world must reorganize. It has no other choice. So let us go deeper, because understanding this intellectually is one thing, but truly grasping it in a way that changes how you move through the world, that requires something more. Consider the idea that your body has become a record of your past. Every emotional experience you have ever had has left an imprint on the nervous system, and those imprints do not just sit quietly in storage. They actively participate in how you perceive and respond to the present moment. Your body is constantly producing chemical signals, hormones, peptides, neurotransmitters that match the emotional states you have most frequently experienced. When you feel anxious, the body produces chemicals associated with anxiety. When you feel lack, the body generates the chemistry of scarcity. And here is the part that most people miss entirely. Once the body gets used to producing those chemicals, it actually begins to crave them, not consciously. You would never choose to keep suffering, but at a cellular level, the body becomes what some researchers describe as addicted to its own emotional chemistry. It will unconsciously seek out situations that justify producing those familiar chemical cocktails, not because it wants to suffer, but because familiarity feels like safety. This is why awareness alone is rarely enough to break a cycle. You can sit down and intellectually map every pattern in your life. You can understand exactly why you react the way you do. You can have profound realizations in meditation or during a powerful conversation. And then the next day, the same situation arises and the body reacts before the mind has a chance to intervene. The heart rate shifts. The muscles tighten, the old emotional chemistry floods the system, and suddenly you are back in the familiar loop, even though some part of you knows better. This is not failure. This is biology. The nervous system has not yet learned a new way of being. Understanding and embodiment are two completely different things, and the gap between them is where most transformation attempts fall apart. So what actually creates lasting change? What shifts the pattern at the level where it truly lives? The answer is not more information. The answer is not willpower or discipline or trying harder. The answer is coherence, internal coherence, where your thoughts, your emotions, and your physical state all begin aligning with a new identity over time. When the nervous system stabilizes in a new emotional baseline, when the brain is no longer constantly pulled back into survival chemistry, something remarkable begins to unfold. New neural connections form. Old reactive circuits begin to weaken from disuse. The body starts adapting to a different internal environment. And as the internal environment changes, the signals you are broadcasting into the quantum field begin shifting. The observer becomes someone new, and a new observer interacts with the field of possibilities in an entirely different way. Imagine your identity as a radio signal being broadcast continuously into the fabric of reality. When that signal is fragmented, one moment full of hope, the next moment collapsing back into fear, 1 hour aligned with your vision, the next hour drowning in old patterns, the transmission is static. The field cannot respond coherently to an incoherent signal. But when your internal state becomes consistent, when your nervous system learns to hold a new frequency with stability, the transmission becomes clear. And the field begins organizing around that clarity. Not instantly, not like a magic trick, but inevitably, because the intelligence behind reality is always reflecting the consciousness that is interacting with it. This is also why two people can read the same books, attend the same seminars, practice the same techniques, and have completely different results. One person is gathering information, The other is undergoing genuine transformation at the identity level. One is trying to change what is happening on the screen of life without touching the projector. The other has realized that the projector is inside, and once you understand that your identity is the projector, the whole game changes. Here is what that shift actually looks and feels like in daily life, because it is important to bring this out of the abstract and into the real. When identity begins to evolve, the first thing you notice is space, a pause where there used to be an immediate reaction, a moment of stillness between the trigger and the response. That pause might seem small, almost invisible, but it is everything. It is the crack in the old architecture through which a new consciousness begins to pour through. Neuroscience has a name for this. It involves the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for higher order thinking, perspective, and conscious choice, beginning to engage more fully instead of allowing the older, more reactive brain structures to run the show automatically. When you pause before reacting, you are not just making a better decision in that moment. You are literally building a new neural pathway. You are training the brain to interrupt the automatic circuit and create space for a conscious response. And every time you choose that pause, the new pathway gets stronger. Every time you respond from awareness rather than from the old conditioning, the old circuit weakens slightly. This is neuroplasticity in action. This is the brain literally reshaping itself based on new patterns of thought and emotion. Over time, the pause becomes natural. The new response becomes the default. And the identity that once reacted automatically has evolved into one that observes, reflects, and chooses. That is a quantum leap in consciousness, and it changes everything. Think about what this means for the repeating patterns in your life. The situations that keep appearing are not there to punish you. They are there because the identity encountering them has not yet shifted enough to dissolve the pattern. The moment the observer genuinely evolves, not just intellectually understands, but actually becomes different at the level of the nervous system, the lesson has nowhere left to attach itself. It simply stops appearing, not because the universe ran out of lessons, but because the person who needed that particular lesson no longer exists in the same form. You have stepped out of the old timeline and into a new field of possibilities, one that reflects the evolved version of who you are. This is where it gets really powerful, because most people assume that transformation is something dramatic, something that requires massive external change, a new country, a new relationship, a complete life overhaul. But the truth is that the most profound transformation is almost invisible from the outside. It is the quiet shift in how you interpret a difficult conversation. It is the moment you catch yourself about to spiral and choose something different instead. It is the new thought that appears where an old fear used to live. These seemingly small shifts are the earthquakes of identity evolution, and they ripple outward into every area of your life in ways you cannot always predict or plan. The relationships that once drained you begin losing their grip. The financial patterns that once felt inescapable begin loosening. The creative blocks, the cycles of self-sabotage, the recurring feelings of being stuck, they begin to dissolve, not all at once, not overnight, but steadily. As the identity stabilizes in its new state, life reorganizes. New people arrive who match the new frequency. New opportunities emerge that would have been invisible to the old version of you. New environments call to you that reflect who you are becoming rather than who you were, and you begin to realize that life was never happening to you. Life was always happening through you, in response to you, as a reflection of you. That realization is not just a nice idea. It is a responsibility, because once you understand that you are the source, not the victim, you can never fully go back to believing the story that the world is against you. You become accountable, not in a harsh or punishing way, but in an empowering way. Because if the pattern is inside you, then you have the power to change it. You are not waiting for circumstances to align. You are not hoping the people around you will finally change. You are becoming someone whose internal alignment draws new circumstances into being. But there is one more challenge that almost everyone faces on this path. And it is the one that derails the most transformations right at the threshold of real breakthrough, because just when the new identity starts to stabilize, something comes to pull you back. It happens to almost everyone. You begin to shift. You can feel it. Something is different. The old triggers are not landing the same way. The old stories are starting to feel foreign. You are becoming more grounded, more aware, more aligned with who you know yourself to be at a deeper level. And then, out of nowhere, the old version of you rises up with everything it has, not because you invited it, not because you consciously chose it, but because the nervous system is fighting for its familiar ground, because the brain, despite everything you now understand, still associates the old emotional patterns with safety, and the new territory, as expansive and beautiful as it is, still feels uncertain to the ancient survival circuitry of the mind. This is the moment that decides everything. This is the threshold between the person you were and the person you are becoming. And most people, right at this edge, unconsciously retreat. They fall back into old behaviors. They return to old conversations, old habits, old emotional loops. And then they wonder why the transformation they could feel building suddenly seems to have vanished. It did not vanish. They stepped back from the threshold, not because they are weak, but because no one told them that this moment was coming, and that it is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that you are close. The temptation to return to the old identity is not the enemy of your evolution. It is the final exam. It is the nervous system asking one last question. Are you really ready to let the old version of you go? And here is what you need to understand about that question. You do not answer it with a single heroic act. You answer it with consistency. With the daily, unglamorous, deeply powerful practice of choosing the new emotional state, even when the old one is screaming for attention, even when the body wants to produce its familiar chemistry, even when every automatic reaction is pulling toward the old loop. This is where stability becomes the most underrated spiritual practice in existence. Not the kind of stability that comes from controlling everything around you, but the kind that grows from anchoring your awareness in who you are choosing to become, regardless of what the external environment is doing. When you can hold that internal stillness in the middle of chaos, when you can feel the old trigger arise and consciously choose a different response, you are no longer the person the old pattern was designed for. You have evolved past it, and at that point, the pattern loses its hold. Not just temporarily, permanently, because the identity it was attached to has fundamentally changed. This is what quantum transformation actually looks like. Not a lightning bolt from the sky, not an overnight miracle, but a steady, conscious, sometimes difficult, and ultimately magnificent process of becoming someone new from the inside out. And when that new identity becomes your stable reality, life begins presenting itself differently. The quality of the challenges shifts. Instead of repetitive lessons designed to crack open awareness, you begin experiencing what might be called expansions, new levels, opportunities that stretch you forward rather than loop you backward. The frequency you carry opens doors that were literally invisible before because the old observer could not have perceived them. They existed in the field of possibilities all along. You simply were not yet the version of yourself capable of receiving them. And here is the truth that ties all of this together. The universe is not testing you. It is not withholding from you. It is not indifferent to your growth or your pain. It is simply responding with perfect accuracy to who you are being in any given moment. The field of infinite possibility is always available. Every timeline you can imagine already exists as a potential waiting to be collapsed into experience by the right observer. The life you can sense on the other side of your transformation is not a fantasy. It is a frequency, and it is calling you toward it right now. The only thing standing between you and that reality is the completion of an internal shift that you have already begun. Because the fact that you are here, listening to this, engaging with these ideas, that is not an accident. That is your consciousness already reaching towards something new. That is the observer in you beginning to sense that a different way of being is not just possible, it is inevitable once the inner architecture aligns. So let me ask you something directly. What is the pattern in your life that keeps returning? What is the lesson that reality keeps presenting in different packaging, with different faces, in different circumstances? What is the emotional experience that seems to follow you no matter how much you try to leave it behind? Because that pattern is not your enemy. That pattern is your greatest teacher. It is pointing you with precision directly toward the identity shift that will finally set you free. Not free from challenge, but free from the loop, free from the repetition, free to step into a version of your life that reflects not where you have been, but who you are becoming. You do not need to have everything figured out. You do not need to eliminate every fear before you move forward. You just need to take one conscious step toward the new identity, and then another and another, until the nervous system learns that the new territory is safe, until the brain builds the new architecture, until the body stops reaching for the old chemistry and begins resonating with something higher, until the observer you carry into the quantum field is finally aligned with the reality you know at the deepest level of your being that you are meant to live. That is the invitation being extended to you right now, not to try harder within the old identity, but to evolve beyond it, to become the version of yourself that no longer needs the old lesson, to step out of the loop and into the expansion, to realize once and for all that the power to change your reality does not live in your circumstances, your luck, or anyone else's choices. It lives in the most profound force in the known universe, your own consciousness, finally awake, finally aligned, finally free. This is your quantum moment, and it starts now, from the inside. If something in this message spoke to something real in you, if you felt a recognition, a shift, a stirring of something that knows it is time to evolve, then do not let that feeling pass without acting on it. Subscribe to this channel right now, because what we explore here goes deeper every single week. Transformation is not a one-time event. It is a practice, and this community is built for people who are serious about becoming the observer that changes everything. Leave a comment below and tell me, what pattern are you ready to evolve beyond? Your answer matters, not just to me, but to you, because naming it is the first act of conscious transformation. And share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who is still asking why life keeps repeating itself, when what they truly need is the understanding that they have the power to become someone new. The universe is listening, the field is responding, and the version of you that lives beyond the loop is already waiting. Step into it.